In a recent study conducted by WalletHub, the financial platform, Utah was named number 2 as the happiest states in America. And if you're wondering how they determined this, they looked at all kinds of things like economic status, what was going on with unemployment in the state, physical activity, and commute times. But folks, I'm afraid there's another side of the story. You see, as we look at mental illness and how it relates to America and Utah, we rank number 1 in depression, and we're number 5 in suicide. And if you're wondering where Salt Lake City is in all of the cities across America, if you look at what insuranceproviders.com said and the data that they looked at, which was how many prescriptions were prescribed here in Utah, we're number 5 in all the cities across the United States. So how do you explain this discrepancy? How do we see ourselves as one of the happiest states around, and on the other side, all the depression and the suicide and mental illness? I'm afraid we're suffering from what I like to call Infinitis. What's Infinitis? Infinitis is us acting as if nothing is wrong, like everything is rosy in our lives. Here's the problem. It drives disconnection. And not only that, it makes us feel like we're a fraud. We can't be ourselves. We can't be real with people. We can't be authentic. The other thing that's a challenge when we struggle from Infinitis is we really reinforce the stigma around mental illness. You see, we tell people that it's not okay to not be okay. And I know a little bit about this because, you see, I was fine too. At the age of 31, I had one of the fastest growing companies here in Utah. I was making millions of dollars, and from the outside looking in, you would have thought, man, that guy has got it made. But what people didn't know and what I was hiding from the world was that I was fine when I really wasn't. I was struggling with stress and overwhelm and depression and anxiety, and ultimately, even though I was fine, I found myself in rehab twice, and I was in and out of the psychiatric hospital because I was on suicide watch and I was not safe for myself. But the whole time I kept telling myself I was fine. And I'm not the only one that has struggled with Infinitis. When you look at the data here in the United States, 1 in 4 people is currently struggling with mental illness. And one of the biggest challenges that we face is that most people will never reach out and get the help that they need. 8 out of 10. And when you look at what holds them back, one of the biggest contributors is how worried they are about disclosing it and maybe losing their job. So when you think about how many people suffer in silence, it's because of the stigma and job concern. You see, people are afraid and ashamed, and rather than get the help that they need, they'd rather step back, tell you they're fine, and then go about their business. But it is impacting the way that they show up to work. And if we look at the kind of impact it has on the workplace, 61% of people surveyed have said that their productivity is impacted by their mental health. And if we go a little bit deeper and look at the kind of culture that we're creating, 85% of people say that poor communication contributes to their mental health. And leaders don't ever receive the kind of training that they need. In fact, it's 87% of the time. So we have to look at the kind of impact that we're having in the workplace and look at the models that we've been using for the last several decades. Number 1, we only look at the crisis, which means that the only time that we really ever address this is when it can no longer be ignored. The second thing, we're using old, outdated models. We assume that people will come to us when they're in pain and when they're hurting, and that's simply not true. So what kind of impact does it have on the workplace? Well, only a negative one. You're not getting the kind of productivity that you hope to get in applying some kind of crisis mindset mental health solution. It reminds me of the parable of the fisherman and going upstream. Imagine for just a moment somebody fishing on the river, enjoying their time, and all of a sudden noticing someone floating down the river, flailing their arms and trying to get to the shore. So the fisherman drops their pole, they swim out, they grab them, and they bring them back to the side. And then it happens again 5 minutes later with another person floating down the river. And then again in 10 minutes, and again another time in 15. In that moment, the fisherman decides to step back and walk upstream to see what is going on with all these people falling down in the river. And here's what they notice. They notice this beautiful overlook, but there's no handrails and there's no signage, and it's clear that people are accidentally falling into the river and floating down. This is where the fisherman has an insight and decides, I wonder what would happen if I went to the hardware store, grabbed some supplies, and built some safety rails and some signage. So that's what they do. Now, I want you to think about this parable for just a moment. You see, there's still a risk that somebody might fall into the river, but they've certainly mitigated the risk and they've done it upstream. In other words, rather than just picking people up downstream and bringing them to shore, he's now addressed an entire community by being proactive. And that's what we have to do when it comes to workplace resilience and well-being. So I find this really interesting in another survey that was done with Mental Health of America and a company in our backyard, Qualtrics. They decided to look at workplace well-being and culture and the impact that leaders have on their environments. They surveyed over 10,000 employees, and here's what they came up with. The number one thing that emerged from the data was that silence is most damaging. What does that mean? That the more that we don't talk about mental health, the more damage we're actually doing. The second thing, that managers are key, that they matter the most when it comes to workplace wellness and resilience. Now, that makes a lot of sense to me, but most of us, I think, have thought that it's the CEO that's got to really bring that, but I want you to just consider the kind of touch that your managers are having with your people. You've got to empower them with better training. And here are the 4 things to focus on. Number 1, more open communication. Normalizing the conversation around mental health is absolutely essential in changing the culture of an organization as it relates to workplace resilience. Number 2, be vulnerable. And what I mean by that is share yourself. Be real with your people. I can only imagine what each of us has been going through in 2020 with the ups and downs of the pandemic and race riots and everything else that has come with this year. Have you voiced it? Have you allowed yourself to be seen? Number 3, demonstrate genuine concern. You've got to let your people know that they matter as a person as much as they do as an employee. Remember, these are people with feelings and emotions and challenges and fear and happiness and joy. The more that you can demonstrate genuine concern and show them that they as a person matter just as much as they as an employee, the more trust you'll build with them almost instantly. And lastly, create psychological safety. Provide opportunities to create a safe environment through listening and building trust by being authentic. And what kind of impact will this have on your organization? Deloitte recently published that investing $1 in proactive mental health programs will bring an ROI of $5. So if you're not convinced that this is the right thing to do from a human perspective, this is absolutely the way to do it if you're looking for an ROI for your organization. And that makes a lot of sense to me. You see, people who feel better perform better. Sales increases by 30%, and productivity improves by 31%. So as you think about just checking the box and going with the status quo, I want you to consider what it might be like to be more proactive. It is clear from the data and from a human perspective that we must do more than just say, it's fine. Is it okay to really just check the box and move on when it comes to mental health? Or is it time to be proactive and move upstream? I want you to consider the people in your life, your loved ones, your family, your friends, and your coworkers. And I want you to just think about where they're at in their life today. And I wonder, are they fine? Thank you.